everybody, it's Emily at ARG Schooling, and I am starting another Emily Reads horror video, and this time I'm going to be reading coming of age horror. So I've done 2 of these so far, where I pick a category from 101 horror novels you should read before you're murdered, and I try to read as many of them as I can and then give my reviews for each of the books I read. So I've just been completely obsessed with this book since I got it. If you haven't picked it up yet, I highly recommend, especially if you're new to horror, or even if you're not new to horror, if you're just like wanting to branch out, read more horror. I think Sadie Hartman's book is fantastic. The way she writes reviews gives like nothing away from the book, but makes you want to pick up every single book she recommends. So in this video, I'm going to be exploring coming of age horror, which honestly is already one of my favorite genres of horror. So I thought it would be really fun to read that during December, because for me, coming of age horror is very cozy. It's just, I don't know, it feels nice to read. So with that in mind, let's talk about the books that I'm going to try to read. I have a whole bunch, like all of them sounded good, but I try to be realistic and limit myself to what I can feasibly manage. So I'm starting this vlog a little bit earlier. Usually I give myself a month. I'm starting this at the end of November, so I give myself a little bit extra time because I just really want to read all the things. So let's talk about the books that I'm hoping to read. So first up is Knock Knock by S.P. Mikowski. This is one I'd never heard of, but Sadie's recommendation it sounds exactly like a thing I'm going to love. This is coming of age horror, like they all are, except usually coming of age horror focuses on boys, and this is one that focuses on girls. And we're following a group of girls who make a pact with each other. They find the idea of childbirth just horrifying, so they make a pact in the woods. I don't know if there's a ritual involved, where they aren't going to have children, and we follow them throughout their life. That's all I know, and I'm already just like really excited to pick this up. I don't know, I think the idea of reading coming of age horror from a female perspective is exciting. I mean, I have read a few, but most of the coming of age horror that I've read is usually from a male perspective, so that's exciting. Next up is December Park by Ronald Mulvey. And this one is sort of like a murder mystery. I think children are being murdered, and we're following a group of boys. One of them, his father, is a detective working on this case. And again, that's all I know, but this is set in the 90s. So there's like a lot of like teen 90s angst. That was when I was a teenager, it was in the 90s, so like I feel like that's gonna be really fun to read. I can't think of any books that I've read that were set in the 90s, so like I'm excited for that. That's something that I'm really looking forward to reading. So I was really excited that this next book is one that Sadie recommended, because I already had it. I've had it on my shelf for a while. This was a gift from my husband a few years ago. I've been dying to read something by this author. So when I saw this was a recommendation, I might have squealed. And that is The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry. I've heard so many good things about this author, about her books. All of her books sound like things I'm going to really want to pick up, but I just haven't yet. And what made me really excited, I didn't really know much going into this. I knew this was set in the 80s and that it was coming of age horror. What I didn't know is what she wrote in her review, that this was giving a lot of My So-Called Life vibes. And you guys, My So-Called Life was my entire personality. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with that show. I am still bitter that we only got 1 season, and it didn't even give us a good conclusion. It left us on a cliffhanger. So like that show meant a lot to me. So to see that this book feels like that, I'm beyond excited to pick this up. All I know is we're following 2 female characters. They're teenage best friends. I think this has to do with murders again, and like they're trying to solve something that's happening. I don't know much more than that, but My So-Called Life vibes, set in the 80s. I think I'm going to love this one. I feel like this is going to be a 5-star. Okay, this next is another one that is an author I've been really wanting to read, and that's The Bone Weaver's Orchard by Sarah Reed. This is an author that I've been intrigued by. I just got one of their newer books in my Nightworms, and I was like, oh, this is an author I need to read. So this one is about a boy named Charlie who is a little bit odd. I think he's like really into insects, and he gets dropped off at this children's home, and they have a problem with children going missing, and they just attribute it to, oh, these are just runaways. But he starts noticing maybe there's something else going on here, and so like we're following him as he's uncovering what's happening to all these missing kids. I just think this sounds really unique. That's a premise that I don't think I've seen very often, especially in coming of age horror. It's usually following like a bunch of kids trying to solve a murder. This is similar to that, but it has such a different and unique twist to that idea. I don't know, it sounds really interesting. So I hear it has really great gothic feeling too. Like I love a good gothic. And so like coming of age gothic horror just sounds like a great combination. Then I have two more that she recommends in the authors profiles. She has author profiles throughout the book. So like we have a Josh Mallerman author profile. We have a Stephen Graham Jones author profile. We have a Paul Tremblay author profile. So some of those have coming of age horror books. So these weren't specifically recommended under her coming of age section, but I'm counting them because they are authors that she recommends and they happen to be coming of age books. So it works. So I have another Paul Tremblay that I've been wanting to read as much Paul Tremblay as possible because so far I've read 3 of his books and they've all been 5 stars. So like I feel pretty good about adding another of his books to my TBR. I feel like, especially if it's coming of age horror, that's bound to be a 5-star. So I have The Disappearance at Devil's Rock. I honestly don't know anything about this besides that it's coming of age. We're following a group of kids. One of them has gone missing. And I think they're trying to figure out what happened. Why he went missing, what happened to him. That's basically all I know. But it's Paul Tremblay. His books just are so good. They all have like a really great characters. They all have just a lot of heart, and that's something that I love in a horror is when I can like feel something for the characters. I'm not here just for gore and creepiness, but I do enjoy that. But I want it to have a side of like, I don't know, characters that I fall in love with and deep emotion. I want to feel something while I'm reading it. And then the last book I'm gonna hopefully try to get to is one that I've had on my TBR for a long time, and that is Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. I think this has to do with grief as well as coming of age, and I don't really know what this is besides it's a novella, which is great for a vlog like this because I'll read it very quickly. And Stephen Graham Jones writes really interesting novellas and really interesting characters and stories. So I'm excited to pick this one up. I really don't know much about it though. I have nothing to say besides that I know it's coming of age and I think it has to do with grief. So that's all I got. But I'm excited to kick this off. I think I'm going to start with The Ghost Tree because it's the one that I've been wanting to read the longest, and I think it'll be nice to read something that was already on my shelves, because that's a goal I've had all, like, not just this year, for years, is to like read the things that are already on my shelves. Everything else I have besides Disappearance at Devil's Rock are either audiobooks or ebooks. So I'm going to start here and I will let you guys know my thoughts after I have finished, but I'm very excited to have a cozy horror December. I just finished The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry, and Like, I don't even know how to continue this video now because I don't know how to get myself to read something else, because this was perfect. This is everything I could have ever asked for in a book. This is full of atmosphere. It's full of great characters that you just like can't help but either love or hate. This is one of my favorite tropes ever. It's just like a really weird, creepy town where like you know something's going on, and it starts to like, over the course of the story, you start to figure out what that weird thing is, and love it. There's witches, there's curses, there's creepy kids. Oh my gosh. The female friendship in this book is just, it was done so well. I can definitely see why Sadie Hartman said this gave her my so-called life vibes, because you have these two best friends who have always been best friends. Like, they've always been there for each other. But now that they're getting older, they're starting high school, their friendship is sort of coming apart at the seams. I think we've all been there. I think at some point in our lives, we've all been in that place where like you no longer feel compatible. Like, you like different things, and maybe you always did, but it just becomes more pronounced when you're a teenager. So we have Miranda and Lauren. Lauren is the protagonist of the story, and Miranda is very much just like obsessed with losing her virginity and becoming a hot girl. And she's obsessed with boys, and that's all she talks about. And Lauren is just not ready to even be thinking about all of that stuff yet. And so like their friendship is kind of coming apart, and there's a whole murder mystery happening that Lauren just like needs to solve. Her father was brutally murdered, and she has like this deep need to solve this murder mystery of these girls who were killed. And I just like cannot get over this book. It was so good. Also, the audiobook was just perfect. There is a character in this story who is a little boy, very young, and I usually just like, I can't stand when people do little kid voices because it never sounds like a little kid to me. But this voice actor, the narrator, did such a, like, it literally sounded like a child, and I loved it. I thought that was spectacular. Like, there have been so many books that I just like could not listen to the audio because their children voices were just terrible. Usually I'll say those are narrated by men. Laws of the Skies was the one that I'm just like, I can't. I don't know if I'll ever come back to that book because the narrator ruined it for me. So the narrator of this was fantastic. So the audiobook is great. Like, all of the voice acting was so good because like it's one person, but all of the voices sounded distinctly different, which is just so hard to do. But I'm getting off topic. But this book, I don't even know how to talk about it because like I don't want to give too much away. So I'm going to try to focus on the things about coming of age horror, like those aspects. This had so much nostalgia factor because it's set in the 1980s. So this is very much a nostalgic kind of read. Not only because it's set in the 80s, but also because it's just like small town teenage drama, small town drama, because you're not just following the teenagers. This book gives you like a pretty grand scope of a lot of different things happening, from like the mayor to the police detectives who are working on the case to some of the women in the neighborhood. So like you get a pretty, like, again, my so-called life vibes, where you get like different tier levels of characters. Like you get to see what the adults are doing, you get to see what the teenagers are doing, what the boys are up to, like that kind of, I don't know. That was really good. And all of those characters had like distinct voices too. Like, it was all done really well. It's not really multiple perspectives necessarily because you're always following like third person, but it felt like multiple perspectives. We're following children who are like experiencing something that pushes them into adulthood, and we are absolutely getting that with Lauren's character. And you have her sort of dealing with the fallout of her friendship. You have her dealing with the grief of losing her father, whilst simultaneously dealing with a mother who seems to hate her because in her mind, her mother blames her for her father's death and was also angry at her father. So now her mother is just this angry woman who is always like harping on her. So she's dealing with that. She's dealing with a first crush and like trying to figure out what those feelings are and if she should be reacting to them. And yeah, so like all of that is done really, really well. All the characters were believable. Lauren is a great protagonist. Like I love her range of emotion over the course of the story. She's not just one note. She's upset a lot of the time because, you know, being 14 is upsetting and she's dealing with a lot. So she's experiencing those emotions and the lore behind what's happening was so interesting. I loved this. This was 5 stars. I kind of want to stop here because nothing could possibly top this. I do now need to read everything Christina Henry has ever written. I have to. So, I don't know what I'm going to pick up next. I'm kind of leaning towards either Knock Knock or The Boneweaver's Orchard because I have both of those through Kindle Unlimited and I kind of want to, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have too many options, but I think one of those, or not. I haven't decided yet. I'm kind of in this like weird like mood reading spiral where I'm like, I'm just going to read whatever I feel like, but I also have this ridiculous TBR plus all the books for this video. So like, I don't know where I'm going next. So it's going to be a surprise for both of us. Oh, this lighting makes me look ghostly. So I just finished reading The Boneweaver's Orchard by Sarah Reed. And I think this is the first book I've read from Sadie Hartman's book that was not a hit for me. And I'm kind of bummed about it, but it's fine. I mean, I didn't hate it. I gave this a 3.5 stars. And most of that is for the, like, atmosphere. This book had great atmosphere. It's just so gothic and like that I enjoyed. I also really like the writing style. So I would definitely read something else by Sarah Reed, even though this wasn't like the best. So this is a story about a boy named Charlie who is sent to this boarding school in England. I think it's after World War I, so I think it's like the 1920s. And his father, he was living with his father in Cairo. His mother's died, and his father, I guess, is in the military, and like he can't take care of him right now, so he sends him to this boarding school. And Charlie is a bit of a loner. He's really into insects. He collects bugs, and that's a big element of the story, is him like looking for bugs, and like his looking for bugs is what gets him to start noticing things. Because this boarding school is definitely a little bit off. I'm not going to give anything away. I'm not going to like tell you guys how it ends or anything like that. But I will say that if you enjoy gothic atmospheric stories, you will probably like this. If you like stories about like weird missing children and like uncovering why they're missing and what's happened to them, because that's essentially what the story is about. Like, little boys go missing from the school all the time, and they just like, oh, they must have run away. But something is a little more ominous, obviously. I will say, like, the school itself, the way it's described and the way Charlie explores it reminded me a lot of, like, Hogwarts. That there's a lot of weird, like, hidden passageways and things like that. Like, have you found all the secret passageways in the school and that kind of thing? So like there's a lot of that. But just overall, the story didn't really do a lot for me. I didn't feel really connected to the characters. It's a very short book. I think it's under 200 pages. I know the audiobook was like 3 hours long. I felt like it almost wasn't enough story. Like I wished there had been a little more meat to it because it felt very bare bones in like the plot and the way the story functions. It just felt almost like it was written for children, which I don't think it was. Like, I couldn't find that anywhere, but it felt sort of like written, like I would hand this to my kids. Like, I would give this to Regina to read, because I just feel like it's almost made for that. Like, if it was billed as like a middle grade horror story, I think I would have maybe enjoyed it a little more. I think I was expecting something a lot darker and a lot like grittier, and it wasn't. So that might have been a bit of a disconnect, but I don't know that it was written, it was intended that way, so that could just be me. But like overall, I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I've read something by this author. Like I said, the writing is really beautiful. The way she describes things was really interesting. Like, I really liked the writing style, and I liked the atmosphere. I just the rest of it didn't do much for me. So it's fine. It was bound to happen. I'm not sad about it. So I'm gonna move on now. I don't know what I'm gonna pick up next. I'm kind of in the mood for another novella, because like I just want to get through as many books as I can this month, because I'm like determined to hit my 150. So I might do Mapping the Interior, which is by Stephen Graham Jones and is another novella. Am I setting myself up for disappointment though? Because novellas don't always work for me. I don't know. But I feel like it's Stephen Graham Jones. I've liked his stuff before. Maybe I'll like this. I have enjoyed, he has another, I would say coming of age, but maybe not, novella called Night of the Mannequins, which was the book that solidified him as a favorite author. It's just so strange and interesting, and like such a, I don't even know how to describe it. It's such a weird, different story about like growing up and friendships kind of falling apart as you get older, and it's beautiful. Like, if you haven't read Night of the Mannequins, go read that. So I think I'm gonna read Mapping the Interior next. Gonna do this a bit vlog style. I just finished reading Mapping the Interior. I'm sorry, this is awkward and heavy. Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. And I wanted to do this like as soon as I finished reading it, but now I'm like, what do I even say about this book? I found it beautifully written, but also confusing. And I really don't know what to think or how to rate it. So I'm not going to give you a rating right now, because I don't know. This is a story about a 12-year-old boy whose father has died, and he's trying to understand him and learn about him and like make connections. And he's looking for pieces of his father in his home. His mother's moved them off the reservation because I think she says something like to keep them from drowning, which the whole story is just incredibly sad. This is really a story about grief and longing for a person that you don't even really know well, but that is a part of you, and you're just desperate to know everything about them. Searching for the ghost of his father in his life. I'm kind of scared to talk about this book, because I feel like me talking about it would spoil it for people who want to read it, so I don't really want to tell you things about it. But also, it's not really scary. Like, the horror factor in this book is very low. This is really more a story about a dead parent and like the ghost of that parent haunting your life. It's more tragic than frightening. There are no frightening scenes in this story. Like, there's nothing graphic, there's nothing gory, there's no horror element, except that, you know, it's like the ghost of his father and like weird things happening around that. Like the house, he's mapping the interior of his home, searching for parts of his father, and like that element is the closest to horror you're gonna, that this is really more supernatural, paranormal kind of a story. I did enjoy it. Like, the writing, Stephen Graham Jones is just brilliant, and his stories are always so full of emotion. And let me adjust this because it's heavy. Full of emotion, full of just like powerful language. Definitely will pull on your heartstrings. I feel like this was a really interesting story to include in my coming of age, just because it's so different from everything else that I've read so far. I really liked it. Every time I read a Stephen Graham Jones, I'm like, I'm gonna read more of that, and then I forget about it for months, years at a time. And so this is only like the third Stephen Graham Jones I've ever read. I've read The Only Good Indians, I've read Night of the Mannequins, and now I've read Mapping the Interior. So I don't know what to read next. Tell me if you are a fan of Stephen Graham Jones and you follow me and know the kind of books that I enjoy, what should I pick up next? I tried to read My Heart is a Chainsaw and just like could not get into it. Is that worth coming back to? I know he has a new book coming out. I don't know yet. But I want to read more of his writing, so let me know if you have read more of his books. Like, what should I pick up next? Because I definitely want to read more of his writing. It's just, his writing is beautiful and so thought-provoking. And you'll also always learn something new, because I feel all of his books that I've read have had so much, like, information about, like, indigenous culture and that sort of thing. And, like, I feel like I've gained knowledge by reading his books. So, anyway, I just wanted to pop in and wrap this up because I just finished it and wanted to talk about it while it was still fresh in my mind. But I don't know how to rate it. Like, I'm just stuck. I want to say it's between a 4 and a 5 star. Probably more of a 4 star, because I did find so many parts of it really confusing. Like, I didn't really fully understand what was happening. So, I don't know, maybe I should reread it at some point just to see if it clicks better on a second read. But for now, I'm going to say 4 stars. But it was good. I don't know what I'm going to read next, because I have a giant stack of things to read that have nothing to do with this video. And so I wanted to tackle some of those things. But yeah, I'm not done. I've only read 3 books so far. I want to read more coming of age horror. So I'm going to be back with another book. I just don't know what. It's Christmas Eve, and I just finished The Disappearance of Devil's Rock by Paul Tremblay, and this was the wrong time to read this book. This was incredibly depressing. I'm not sure what to do now. Like, this has kind of ruined me, and I don't know how to pick something else up. This is a story about a boy who goes missing, and we're kind of like unraveling what happened. He disappears one night when he's out with a group of friends, and the story kind of goes from there. You're just sort of getting bits and pieces of the story of what happened that night, and you're following a bunch of perspectives. This book was really written in an interesting way, because you're following the mother, the sister, you're following some of the friends, and you're getting these flashbacks through Tommy, the boy who went missing, through Tommy's journal entries. And like, you're kind of starting to piece together, like very slowly over the course of the story, what actually happened, or what was happening. And it's super depressing and sad. It's beautiful. It was really well written. And this is sort of like part coming of age story, part ghost story, part like, I don't know, paranormal thriller. And it's really, I don't read a lot of things like this, and so it is coming of age sort of, but it's also not. There was a few things that I didn't really love. Like, I found the middle of the book really, really long. Like, it took me a really long time to get through this. I've been reading this book for a full week, and it shouldn't have taken me that long. Most of his books I read relatively quickly, so this one was a bit of a slog in the middle. And, yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed the story. The end is really heartbreaking, and, yeah, I sat and stared into space for a while when I finished it and was just like, what am I gonna do now? Not the typical thing you want to be reading when you're trying to be in the festive Christmas spirit, you know? it's not really conducive to that. But it was beautiful. Like the way the story is written, and like the mother's perspective especially is just so heart-wrenchingly sad. Just like you're going through every stage of grief with her the whole way through, and it's very unsettling and sad. And even the sister, what's happening with her storyline was really, really sad. I did enjoy all of the teen characters. I thought they all felt very believable. Like they're all really well written. Because sometimes it can be hard to capture the voice of teenagers when you're so far past being a teenager, but I think Paul Tremblay did a really good job. All the characters were very authentically like 13, 14-year-olds. So I really appreciated that. The audiobook was pretty good too. Even though the middle got a little slow and I had to keep taking breaks because I was just like, I think if I wasn't doing it for this video, I might have DNF'd this because it was so slow, and it is December, and I usually don't like reading things that are going to bog me down this time of year, but I persevered, and the payoff at the end was worth it. But yeah, now I'm sad. So now I'm left with the question, do I end it here? Part of me wants to try to read Knock Knock by S.P. Miskowski, I think is the name, and squeeze in one more. I have a full week left, but do I really have time? I might still try to read it, but I don't know if it's going to happen here in this video. So this month I read 4 coming-of-age recommendations from Sadie Hartman's book, 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered. And I read The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry, which was by far my favorite. This is my favorite coming-of-age book I read for this video. Maybe one of my favorite coming-of-age books I've read ever. This was just done brilliantly. Loved this so much. Loved all of the characters. Thought the whole story was just riveting and so well done. Like a perfect coming-of-age story. The vibes. The 80s vibes were so just perfection. I read The Bone Weaver's Orchard by Sarah Reed, which did not work nearly as well for me. This was more of a 3-star. It was fine. It was just very okay for me. It didn't quite hold up to what I expect from a adult coming-of-age horror story. The gothic vibes were great, but the overall plot of the story was just, nah. It was okay. I read Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones, which I really want to go back and reread sometime because I listened to the audiobook and I feel like this was a beautiful story, but a confusing story, and I feel like I need to reread it sometime so that I can really get everything, because I don't know, this is a book that I feel requires multiple reads. You know, sometimes you read a book and you're like, that's good, but I missed things, and then you read it again, and like, rereading builds layers. I feel like this is a book that has layers, and I definitely need to go back and read it again. But it's kind of similar, honestly, to the Devil's Rock book, because it's a story about grief and an exploration of grief. I read a lot of grief things this month, which is weird, being that it's December. Am I mourning December? Am I mourning 2023? I don't know. I feel like I've read a lot of grief books this year, but yeah, this was beautiful, but just, I don't know. I feel like I need to read it again. And then I read The Disappearance of Devil's Rock by Paul Tremblay, which was really good, just not what I was expecting and kind of depressing. So I don't know, was this a success? I already knew I loved coming-of-age horror. I've added some new favorites to my books that I've read in this genre. I definitely want to keep reading. There's so many more things that I haven't gotten to yet in coming-of-age horror, so I'll definitely continue reading it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked what you've seen here, hit the subscribe button and give me a like. I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.